Welcome everybody once again to Author Mastery Insights, and this is a new addition to the series of interviews I've done with wonderful thought leaders within the chiropractic profession. And today I have Dr. Phillip Ebrall, and for me this is a very exciting opportunity. And Dr. Phillip, welcome once again to speak with you.
Thank you, Marcus. It's lovely to be in your company and that of your listeners and viewers.
I know this is going to be a great conversation. I'm excited for it. For those not familiar, Dr. Phillip headed up the RMIT program and then left in 2011 to establish the CQ University program, which is now very strong success, and also contributed to the leadership of new programs in Malaysia and the International Medical University, South Korea, and Hensoi University, and also Tokyo, the Tokyo College of Chiropractic, which he became president. Today he's working with a new program at the University of Makati in Manila, which takes its first students in August 2025, which is not far off from the time of recording, so that's very exciting. And with teams in India and Ethiopia to establish new programs. So this is really a wonderful scope of chiropractic influencing throughout the world. And so that is very exciting.
I think the really exciting thing about that too, Marcus, is the growth that is there. And it's the growth that's coming from the grassroots of those countries and the people in those countries. It's not an institution trying to impose their program on people. It's what the people there want as far as chiropractic goes. And it's a real blessing to be involved in helping that.
I think that's entirely true. And I'm going to take that conversation a little bit later because I think that is so important for what we know and understand of chiropractic in the West, but there is such a great and broader scope. And with your permission, I'll come back to that because there's a few things I want to speak to before we even get to those really pivotal points.
Right.
And also I'd love to finish just a little bit more introduction about you, because Dr. Phil, for those that are not aware, specialises in curriculum design and development for chiropractic education, also edits the Asia Pacific Chiropractic Journal, still finds time to write, hence his new book, this absolute epic Philosophy of Chiropractic. And if you have not got this, it's on Amazon. Grab your copy. It is an essential read for chiropractors wanting to develop and understand not only philosophy, but an understanding of chiropractic as a profession, chiropractic as a scientific model as well. So I think this is a fantastic start to where I would like to start before we go down a very deep series of conversations, which is an amazing thinker. Let's just start with this conversation. Phil, what brought you to write this book? What caused you to put the time, the effort, the energy aside to bring a tome like this out into the chiropractic arena?
Very deep question. I think since I became an academic in 1990, I was tasked with teaching basics of chiropractic. And I realized that what I had learnt at then Pitt, which became RMIT, was insufficient. So there was a lot of groundwork that had to be done. And I'm sorry for the students I had early in those days because I knew so little, about which I now know probably even less with confidence. But it's a journey. And I think every chiropractor has to have their own journey and learn at their own pace. You've got on the one hand your glowackies who will teach you how to work with your patients, how to build your practice and how to do that. But you also have to have that something inside, which is your practice, which is the way that you see it and the way that you act it and be it. And I do hope that this will help some people start to see both sides of this wonderful chiropractic coin. The chiropractic philosophy on one side, which drives getting up in the morning and going in and caring for people, and the philosophy of chiropractic, which is like a philosophy of science, why it is what it is. Fascinating question, really.
It is, but the investment you put into this book, there's so much research, there's so much content, and I'm going to ask, and again, for the listeners, I like to have these engaging conversations and even to challenge the people who brought great thoughts to the profession. And you've titled this book "A Philosophy of Chiropractic" as compared to chiropractic philosophy, the textbook. I'd
Correct.
love your thoughts and distinctions between a philosophy of chiropractic and chiropractic philosophy.
Well, I think your own chiropractic philosophy is so passionate from what I've seen through your Facebook communication posts and what I know you do in the profession. And it's your chiropractic philosophy that drives you to engage with your patients and drives you to do all the things. Like, look at your clinic. It's immaculate. It's beautiful. It's clean. It's healing. It's got a vibe. That's all part of your chiropractic philosophy. But what is this chiropractic about which you have your philosophy? And that's where I come back to the philosophy of chiropractic. What is it that you're dealing with? Could you be a naturopath in that room? Could you be a physiotherapist? Why a chiropractor?
That's a really interesting question. And the moment you ask that question, why a chiropractor? And it, to me, it links into a values question, a belief question, an experiential question, because I'm going to answer that question for myself as my own exploration in this conversation with you. So, why could I be any of those other things? You could be, but would you be? Just because you can be doesn't mean that you would want
Great
to be.
question.
And for me, chiropractic embodies timeless principles, immutable laws, undeniable truths, and to anchor into those gives confidence, certainty, and belief to the actions that I would choose to take. And in that regard, why I choose to be a chiropractor is I have a belief system that there is a universal intelligence in all matter that gives it its properties, maintaining itself in existence. I believe that the body is smart, that there is an intelligence, and inherent in that intelligence is our
Sorry, my
desire
dog.
to
Sorry about
express and explore. Yeah? And so chiropractic makes sense to me. Medicine would not make sense to me. I could be a doctor, but I'd be a heretic as a medical practitioner. I could be a naturopath, but I would feel like prescribing a diet and nutrition supplementation would not fulfill the full gifts of the human potential to liberate the spark of life that the mental impulse allows to be expressed. And again, when you look at the deep philosophy of chiropractic, which aligned by D.D. Palmer, that chiropractic is about unifying man the physical with man the spiritual. If you recognize that there is an elevation of consciousness potential within impacting the nervous system's full expression, then we look to our philosophy in chiropractic as a greater gift to humanity, and our service and contribution through the adjustment is magnified by that understanding. So when you ask me that question, it gets me really excited about remembering my philosophy and then knowing that the chiropractic philosophy unify in a way to express my potential, to harness gifts in making an impact. So that, again, I just wanted to respond personally to that. Why is it that you are a chiropractor amongst all the things you can do, even from an academic perspective? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the chiropractic philosophy too.
Well, that's a fairly deep question, Marcus, and I think it's rather interesting that I started from commercial broadcasting in Esperance. And as part of the radio station that I established there, we had a health segment, which was a chiropractic segment, thanks to Richard McMinn. And he was the chiropractor in Esperance who had a great reputation, great healer, a graduate of Sherman, so lots of energy and lots of pizzazz. And we were talking away on the radio, and then we'd chat away privately. And I said to him that one day I was feeling jaded with broadcasting, and I wasn't sure what I should be doing next. And they said, "Well, why don't you become a chiropractor?" Just off the cuff like that. And I said, "Me?" He said, "Yeah, I'll give you a book or two, have a look, see what you think." I said, "But I don't want to go to America like you came from Sherman." He said, "No, there's a new college that's just opened in Melbourne. You can do it there." So long story short, came across the Nullarbor and started as a student there in 1985. And I'm grateful to Richard for his impetus to get me onto this new track. While at RMIT, as it became, but then Phillip Institute of Technology, there was a big divide. And it was a painful divide for students because there were greats like Dean Lyons and Neil Davies, two people I respect deeply, who came out of Palmer and knew what chiropractic was about. They talked subluxation, they talked the adjustment, they talked the way that the central processing altered all the good things about chiropractic. And there were the others who had either come through the institute itself or had come in from another little program that's now part of Chiropractic Australia, and they had no idea. They actually ridiculed the concept of subluxation, and that made it very hard for me as a student to come to grips with. So I thought I have to do some work around this, and I remembered that during my younger years, I'd been raised in some sort of quasi-religious-y sort of thing that said the world's going to end, don't have a bank account, don't go to don't do it, all the don'ts, and you're forever a sinner. But there will be a time when there'll be a new world, there'll be no electricity, there'll be nothing. And I thought, well, if that's going to happen, I'd like to be a healer and to be able to heal with my hands. And that sort of had me in the right mindset to become a hand healer. And that principle is playing out now in Manila at the University of Makati, where the graduates will be able to go to any of the provinces and work without electricity. Now, there can be a hurricane, cyclones, whatever they have, they're huge storms. There'll still be a beacon in those communities of a chiropractor who can heal with their hands. The second part I didn't realize or I didn't know about until after I'd graduated, and Mum said she was going to a chiropractor. I said, really? You never told me that? She said, yeah. The story is that when she was a child for about 13, she was very sickly with bronchitis and asthma and those sorts of things. So her father, my grandfather, took her to Sydney on a steamer, a 2-night journey, took her to a chiropractor, had her treated and adjusted, brought her back, and she went on to raise 3 sons. So, yeah, that's sort of a pretty powerful awakening there. And my mother still went to see Paul Searle in Launceston or Hans Mueller, 2 very, very fine professionals who have done so much for chiropractic in Australia. But I just think it's a nice little thing that comes back to why am I a chiropractor? It's because, here we go, it works. It does stuff. It does amazing stuff. And it's in your hands to be able to do it.
And it is a true gift, and those stories always inspire our own connection to the profession. And that gives us an insight into your history coming into chiropractic. However, I'd like that one step further and tell me about your philosophy. Why is it not that you became a chiropractor, but why is it that the philosophy of chiropractic compels you to continue to serve, to contribute, to write papers, to manage journals, to be a force in chiropractic education? What is it about this profession, its philosophy, that calls you to the actions that you undertake?
I'm a pragmatist. When I went back to do my postdoctoral studies at Southern Cross University, I was sat in a room and I wasn't allowed to leave until I had worked out my philosophic lens through which I saw the world. And I think all of us should have to do that and figure out, am I a realist, a pragmatist, a believer in fairies or whatever, and find out how we see the world so we can start to understand it. And as a pragmatist, we have, in scientific terms, a test. If you're a statistician, you'll do a t-test and p-values, and you say, this is most likely true. And the deniers love this because they look at the numbers, say, oh, there's the p-value. What you do doesn't work because the p-value says so. Yeah, that's absolute rubbish. It's totally the wrong tool to be using. The tool is the experienceable difference test. If the patient experiences a difference after your intervention, then what you've done must have done something. We can't be so confident to call it causation, but there's such a powerful association. And we see, once we take away these blinkers of this quasi-religion of evidence-based medicine or practice or whatever people want to call it, which is really not so evidence-based at all when you look at it. Once we get away from that and realize we are dealing with people and we are changing the world one life at a time. And if what I have done has been good for that person, then I've done what I can do. And that's it.
I love that. And just on that comment about, the way that we can critique the impact and efficacy and value of chiropractic and measuring it scientifically. Yesterday, I wrote the framework. I haven't completed it by any stretch of the imagination, but I wrote a framework for a blog that I'm going to post at one point called Nihilism Masquerading as Science. And really what it is a lot of people use a scientific criteria to assess outside of the context of what the criteria is intended for to draw a claim that cannot actually be defended when you argue back from a more holistic perspective. So I love that you speak to that point because chiropractic works, and that in and of itself is definitive.
Yes,
However, we can't do a double-blind study.
the people who can't, I'll come back to a blind study in a tick, but the people who can't understand that we get results are the people in power at the moment. They are the people like David Byfield, Christine Cunliffe, and others in England who are serving the GCC, the General Chiropractic Council, who have come out now to actually censor what a chiropractic program can teach. You cannot teach, or actually I put it a different way. If you do teach universal intelligence, for example, your program will not be accredited. In other words, you can't teach it. And that is absolutely pathetic. I've published that with McCoy Press and actually had the minutes showing they were asked for the evidence, and the three of them from the three colleges at the time gave them nothing. So the failure of those three academics in England or the United Kingdom, because Byfield's from Wales, their failure to understand the literature that they were responsible for protecting, building, and even contributing to, their failure has cost us dearly. And I think that's the peak of what I call the deconstruction of chiropractic. I'm not at all surprised to see RMIT collapse because chiropractic was so deconstructed. The kids weren't even getting pediatric placements, hands-on babies. And we've got to start this new idea of we are reconstructing chiropractic. You're doing it your way with the tremendous things, the many projects you have running. I'm doing it my way through this book and through other papers and so forth. But we have to reconstruct because the deconstructors see that as their cause. And that cause became a movement, and that movement has become a business. People are making money now out of this, and eventually it will degenerate to a racket. And you can tell me it's a racket. I accept it's a racket. I see colleges that on the one hand say, we've signed on to this thing that says we don't teach subluxation, yet their college catalogue shows that they do teach. And I think Timothy Mertz's paper showed that, all but two colleges were teaching subluxation, while a few of them were saying, no, we don't go anywhere near it. Yeah, this hypocrisy has got to end. That's the racket. And the racket is, I would be provocative here, and I would say the racket is being driven by the WFC, the World Federation of Chiropractic. It's to look good before the WHO, which we know is run by China. So, yeah, if that's where we want to go, I'd say let them stop pretending to be chiropractors because they are not.
I want to come back into the curriculum design, because I think, one, you have a profound influence in that area. Your book does refer to the significance of education and what it means for the development of a chiropractor. And because you have this specialization in curriculum design for chiropractic education, because you have even reached into this, I mean, you've written papers on the changing of the chiropractic rhetoric, the identity of the chiropractor or the chiropractic profession. And you highlighted the challenges that you faced as a student in teaching institutions where there was a disparity between a chiropractor who would provide insight and education information on subluxation and the adjustment, and then other teachers that would disparage those elements. And now we have a world that the curriculum design is starting to move the chiropractic teaching institutions even further, not just to disparity, but the elimination. You might have been getting two views in the past and could make a choice. Now we're actually getting one view and being told if you do not have that view, then you are going to be marked down accordingly, or that you are going to have other consequences to your education. Or as a teaching institution, even the inability to perform education as a limitation due to these principles and philosophies. I'd love, given that background, the papers that you've written, and your own influence in developing educational curriculums for chiropractic schools, what do you see as the primary, outside the political ramifications, the primary challenge that we are going to face as a profession with the current education models that are being established?
The integrity of our academics. It's as simple as that. If we look at Central Queensland University, one of Katie DeLuca's papers is critical of the subjects, patients, who use the term adjustment. And it was basically to the effect they don't even know the language of manual medicine. Well, bugger that, Katie, dearest. It's not manual medicine. Darling, if you think it's that, get out. It's chiropractic, and it's the adjustment. And if the patient is using that, then you give a gold star to the chiropractor, because the chiropractor is using the right language of what we do. I picked up a beautiful quote yesterday from Mark Rudin, who runs the Chiropractic Academy, and he's teaching at Cleveland College of Chiropractic now. And he simply says the difference between manipulation and the adjustment is the effect the adjustment has on the central neural processing. Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm using it in my next book, which I'm halfway through writing now, to head up the chapter on the adjustment, because we have the evidence. If you're an academic, get the bloody evidence and read it, and read the evidence that says a high velocity, low amplitude, segment specific thrust with intent will give a different neurological input to the brain than just fiddling around and rattling bones. You know, that the fiddling around and rattling bones is deconstruction. We've got to reconstruct, and there is nothing more powerful than a segment specific adjustment.
That research is amazing. By the way, there's a paper by Heidi Horvath from New Zealand College of Chiropractic Centre for Chiropractic Research that actually shows that the spinal adjustment, as you said, high velocity, alters the prefrontal cortex neurologically even before the physical structures of the body, whereas the manipulation or mobilization of tissues has a local response without the neurological response. And we've got the evidence that demonstrates what you're stating there with research papers by neuroscientists and chiropractors, which Heidi has both a PhD in neuroscience and a chiropractic degree. So we're able to evidence what you're speaking about here. And there's a requirement for chiropractors to educate themselves in the literature to be informed about and understanding what's taking place during an adjustment and its distinctions from manipulation. So thank you for raising that. It's such important science.
Yes, for me, watching Heidi's work, I love her dearly, and she's a massive, massive fan of what she's doing and where she's going. But you know, when you go down to the supermarket and you chuck a 50-cent coin out of your change into one of those yellow things that goes round and around and around and around the donation hole, then plop, finally goes down. Heidi's doing a lot of this round and round and round and round, and now she's starting to go down the hole. And the beauty of having been around and around and around is she knows her shit. She
mm,
knows what she's talking about. And you know that when she says what you've just paraphrased, that it's right.
mm.
And you can take it and accept it. And I think that's such incredibly powerful. Heidi is a massive reconstructor of our profession.
Absolutely. And you spoke about the language that we use, and again, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here because obviously great advocate of Heidi, and I've had conversations with her. You spoke about the language person saying manipulation, and they're not exhibiting chiropractic language. So our lexicon, our language is so important. Why do you think it's so important? And given that you're with the Asia Pacific Chiropractic Journal, you are involved in publication. And this is a long question to bridge together lexicon, publications, research, and the chiropractic paradigm. Heidi still utilizes terms in order to get published in significant journals in her mind, where she'll have to use the word manipulation or manipulable lesion and manipulation instead of the terms adjustment, instead of the terms subluxation. And she can't use those terms in those publications because they will not publish outside of the scope of their influence. What are your thoughts on not just the lexicon of chiropractic and its significance, the need for researchers to publish in the chiropractic vernacular, the chiropractic lexicon, and be actually get citations within the literature using chiropractic language?
It's like when you get a group of blokes in a room after a footy game, they want to see who's got the longest, you know what. Yeah, it's a contest about nothing. A contest with no meaning. A contest that if you're in a PubMed index journal, oh, you get a gold halo. If you're not, you're in a chiropractic journal, nobody cares. The reason why academics will say they have to be in these journals is so they get their funding. So again, it's a racket. Publishing is a racket. If you want to get into JMPT, for instance, supposedly God's granted journal of something for the profession, you got to pay $3.5 grand US. That's the cost per paper that comes out of the grant monies, which come out of your donation to ASRF, for example. And then they will fund the research. Part of that funding goes to make the journal racket richer. We are wasting so much time in trying to play the medical game. Heidi's work will stand up no matter where it's published. But I understand why she's doing it this way at the moment. It's about international credibility and so on and so forth. Great. We can translate that for us, but it will be beautiful when she comes out and really owns the chiropractic language. Now, Deed Harrison is doing that now. He's been around and around and around the donation hole too, by showing with his impeccable work that CBP does something and you can measure it and you know it's doing this. He's now linking that. This is going down the hole. He's linking that to the health changes in the patient. And he's doing it in chiropractic language. And he's doing it in the journals that are outside our profession. But he's, he and Heidi are strong people, are strong researchers. Journals will fight over themselves to get their papers. So I don't think we need to have any fear about our lexicon. How we use it in our clinic, it's not for me to say. What you say to your patient, that's up to you. And that's the beauty of subluxation and my concept that it's a fuzzy narrative. It's how you talk about it to your patient that matters. That's what carries the idea of healing to them.
So, what are your thoughts of the cost or consequence of being concessional around the language, around the lexicon, particularly subluxation and adjustment?
I think that's a pathetic thing to do. If you are a chiropractor and you are not naming the lesion, I'm going to talk in medicine now, medical words. If you don't name your target therapeutic lesion, then you have no right to do surgery on something imagined. You have no right to prescribe a pill. You've got to have a diagnostic entity. Our diagnostic entity includes the vertebral subluxation complex with all its evidence. If we're not addressing that, what are you doing as a chiropractor? Oh, you loosening sticky joints. Well, down the road at the massage parlor, they'll loosen more than a sticky joint, but you can go there. That's not chiropractic. And the same with the chiropractors who don't talk about what they are addressing. It's fraudulent. You have to be on song with what you are doing and why, because then you can show the patient what to expect, show them the outcomes, measure them, and engage them with the healing process. And this is where things are very, very weak in Australian education. The Council on Chiropractic Education Australasia does not have any idea of what chiropractic is. Even their revised standards, which I was reading through last week, don't define chiropractic. They don't say what a chiropractor does. They don't talk about subluxation, and they don't talk about adjustment. An orthopedic medical student could sit any chiropractic exam on those standards and pass it. Yeah, and that's the deconstruction of our profession. I think the CCEA needs a competitor because they've just been granted another 5 years of advising the board on which programs have any decency or good enough to be registered. It's a monopoly and it's an old boys club. And I think that is horrid when it comes to being on the ground in education.
Absolutely, and we've already spoken that the disparity existed for a long period of time, but now it's shifting towards the absence of disparity, and therefore there is no one to challenge the authority of being anti-subluxation in your teaching institutions, which leads me to another question. And again, we spoke offline on a book by Strauss and Howe called The Fourth Tuning, and I happen to have read that last week, and you've commented this in a conversation that we had, and I sent that off to my children to say, look, the world isn't a turning, there is a change. And if you go back to the history of chiropractic, to the being jailed for practicing medicine without a license during the pioneering period, to the will case, where the containment and elimination of chiropractic profession, to the period of now, changes to the educational curriculum for chiropractors to eliminate and diminish the ability to maintain the philosophical integrity and the lexicon of our profession. It would appear to me that we are going through a period of substantial change, and you're using the term deconstruction and reconstruction. So I'd love for you, because I know you've read this book, and I'd love for you to talk to the idea that the world is changing, the profession is changing, and we are at a potential crisis point, and what the book calls a crucible of crisis. And how do you see the current crisis we face as a profession in the context of a cycle of change, a cycle of life within not just the world or a season of life, our profession? How do you see this change in that context of
I see
where we're
that the first 4 phases, and for those who haven't read the book, a cycle is about 20 to 25 years. They add up to a saculum, which is a lifetime of 85 to 100 years. The first is a high. The high was, in my book, from about 1895 to about 1917, when DD got the profession going, got new colleges started, everything was growing good, doing all that chiropractic should do, until Oakley Smith went off in 1918 and founded naprapathy. Bang. That led to an awakening period. That's the second of Strauss and Howe's cycles. The awakening, I reckon, was from about then to 1942-3. And that's when we see Gonstead really came to the fore, and we see BJ's clinic was big, massive. That was the awakening period, as I see in chiropractic. Then it unraveled. That's the third, oh, three fingers, third, the unraveling. And that was from when about John Nugent and C.O. Watkins got hold of the National Chiropractic Association in the US in the early 1940s, and closed down so many small colleges, forced everyone into this 4,200-hour medicalized curriculum. Why? Because medicine did it. Why did medicine do that 1910, 1911 with Abraham Flexner? Because the rich industrialists funded him to do it. Because then they'd have a market for their oil-based medicines. So they controlled education. And these two chiropractors thought, well, we need to do that so we can get registered. They might have had a good intent, but the outcome, well, we get up from there to about the crisis that I think started about 1965 when Anglo-Europeans started in England. All of a sudden, outside North America, there was a new college that was not of the Palmerian mindset. Then 1975, when Phillip Institute started, again, it tried to be of the Palmerian mindset, but very quickly became of the National College mindset. So we started to unravel. And it unraveled with peaking with, as you mentioned, the Wilk trial. And I reckon the final payout of that broke the early research nexus that had been formed. The Pacific Consortium of Chiropractic Research, colleges were getting together collegiately. Suddenly, with that money, it became big business. But I can't move into another repeat of that cycle. There's been no high after that. Maybe I haven't been able to describe our current or our past immediate high well enough. But even if we do accept it was there somewhere and there's an awakening, it brings us to another unraveling. And I really don't want to go there, which is why I'm arguing now that the end of those, the Strauss and Howe end, and we're in deconstruction. All the things that have been built were taken away. We see the MBCE and their exam system. And it's going to be very interesting to see how with the Trump regime, what is going to happen to education. If they put it back to the states, no more Department of Education. In theory, no more NBCE and Council of Chiropractic Education telling colleges what to do. It'll come back to being state-based. I think I'd like to think that's past. I like to think the work from Heidi and from Harrison and from some of our other leading researchers is strong enough to be putting us into this reconstruction period. The trouble is we're all timid. We're too timid to say subluxation. You know, you go to a conference and you say, you're embarrassed. Why? It's what we do. It's what got us here over 125 years or more. It's something to be extraordinarily proud of, that you know how to find one and fix it. A lot of chiropractors don't. And that's what I would urge our graduates who may not have been exposed to this sort of thinking, really use the power of what you're doing to look at their practice and look at their thinking and see how they can be bigger, better, stronger, longer chiropractors.
That'll bring me to the last question as we come to the end of our time together, and I'd love to continue this conversation, though time is a consideration there. We've spoken about deconstruction and reconstruction, and as I think to this process, and if we have a crucible of crisis, And an unaddressed deconstruction has the potential to completely dismantle the profession from its history, from its our original philosophies and the lexicon. So a deconstruction sees the medicalization of chiropractic. A reconstruction sees the vitalizing of the original foundational principles and philosophies. And for those individual chiropractors who are now, as they listen to this, go, I hadn't really thought that there's this possible reframing of the entire profession, and in doing so that we lose our identity. And now that I've heard this conversation, I'm awake to it, and I need to make a choice. I need to be more equipped, more educated, more empowered, and accept that I have to be a little bit stronger in my resolve around what I love, what I'm passionate about, the principles and philosophy of chiropractic. So to those people, as they now listen to this conversation and say, okay, as uncomfortable as I am, as nervous as it makes me to step forward in service of the profession, in defense of principled chiropractic, and coming back to the book, what would you, from a philosophical point of view, have these people learn, have them to read, to start thinking upon, to give them that foundation to be strong in the face of adversity and challenge, to reconstruct our profession in a way that gives us longevity and impact now and into the future?
Goodness me. Goodness me, Marcus. I think it always starts between the chiropractor and the patient. What are you going to say to the patient? Or for a start, do you even have a conversation with the patient? Do you ask how they are? Or do you just do the practice building stuff? The computer says it was their kid's birthday. Oh, happy birthday to your kid. And that's the end of your conversation. You need to do more than that. You need to be a real person. You need to become the beacon of hope in your community. You need to become the person that the public can trust. And so all your actions have to be towards trust. Trust means that you work out what is going on. One of the greatest and most humbling joys of editing the journal is reading every paper and reading this phenomenal work from people like Scott Cuthbert in AK, where they have a patient with this problem. Harvey Getzoff's another guy, Charles Blum, another guy. And they go through, oh, we think this, we think that. You know, why do they think that? Try to, when you read a case report, try to get into their thinking. Why are they looking for that? Don't just turn it off and say, I haven't learned AK, it's not me, I'm just going to hit the high spots. That's the shortcut. You don't want to do that. You want to be inquisitive like Charles Mazarski and ask, how can I do this better? What else can I use my tuning fork for with a patient? And once you've worked out what's wrong with the patient, you've got to give it a name. And the vertebral subluxation complex is a great name because that forces you to give your neurological evidence, your connective tissue evidence, your muscle involvement, which muscles are weak and why, and that gets you right off into AK, your vascular evidence, and your kinematic movement evidence. You know, once if you use the language, it tells you what you need to do because you have to answer those questions. The fact you haven't been taught to think that way is the shame of the educational institutions. But if you start to think that way, then you will be empowering yourself. And empowerment is not going into a phone booth and popping on a Superman costume and then flying off to save the world. Empowerment is a growth process. At times painfully slow, but it's a growth process.
Yeah. And that growth process begins by understanding the foundational principles and philosophy of chiropractic, which is why this book is such an important integral part of your personal and professional growth and development. And by steeping yourself in the principles and philosophies of chiropractic, you can become a beacon of hope. And I know when we sit back and we think of those periods of years when people were self-isolating, coming to the chiropractor was sometimes, certainly in my practice, was a great source of hope for them, a great opportunity for connection for them. And chiropractors have always been a place where people can come to feel not only better and healthier, but to feel connected, to feel a sense of being understood and to have a real meaning and purpose to the relationship they have with their practitioner. Your words there, Dr. Phil, becoming a beacon of hope, happens when we own and understand our philosophy, when we explain to them things that happen in their body because of the presence of vertebral subluxation, and that gives them a sense of understanding. And the correction of subluxation then gives them neurological integrity, optimization of health and life potential, and that is the greatest hope. And that reminds us always to steep ourselves in philosophy, to speak our chiropractic truth, because the world needs this now more than ever. If we are facing a crucible of crisis, chiropractic can be the beacon of hope. Are there any final statements, Dr. Phil, before we close off here?
I think that's an absolutely wonderful summation. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for your making me, I think my brain's broken. Thank you for your great questions. It's been a pleasure, Marcus. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Philip. As always, I'm so grateful for all that you do, grateful for the time that I get to spend with you. Everyone, we got a job to do. Let's own our principles. Let's make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you.